Have you lost faith in the two main parties? This is despite a landslide victory for Labour. They have only had a third of the votes across the UK, with the Conservatives having around 24%. And in Scotland, there was a collapse of the SNP vote with a huge swing to Labour. A similar story in Wales, actually. The Conservatives lost all of their MPs there. But across the country, there was a big show of support for reform. Now, the party came second in around 100 constituencies with more than 4 million votes. And the Greens also saw an increase in their voter share and now have 4 MPs. And we've seen the highest number of independent MPs since the 1950s too. So did you turn your back on Labour and the Conservatives? 0207 862 2222 is the number to tell us why, and we'll speak to you in just a moment. What do you think about the rise of reform, Mike?
Well, I'm a Conservative with a small c, and I always will be. And I wasn't attracted at all to reform in the latest election campaign.
Why have they seen such a rise then?
Well, I don't know, but the reason I wasn't attracted is that they have attracted some very unsavoury people in the 4 or 5 weeks that Nigel Farage has been doing it. The vetting process went all wrong. I think down.
Well, you could say the same about the Greens, and yet they still got a huge amount of votes. So the question is, why? Yeah,
but what I'm saying is what the vetting process threw up was that there's some unsavoury people attracted to Nigel Farage. Now, I think now that he's got a place in Parliament, he can deal with that. And I think he will be a much tastier prospect next time round. But I'm also grateful to Nigel Reform for being there to shake up the Tories, who've now got to reinvent themselves. They've been drifting away from real Tory politics ever since David Cameron became the leader. Drifting away from the origins of what we're all about. And I want them now to have a revolution. I want a good, proper Conservative leader to take charge and rebuild the party in the next 5 years.
Just to make a couple of points about reform, it's being seen as this great surge, and compared to the last election, it is, although you remember that Nigel Farage stood down Brexit Party candidates in hundreds of seats, which helped Boris Johnson significantly. I think he deeply regrets that choice now. It's not that new, though, as a phenomenon. In 2015, UKIP, which was the predecessor party of Reform, won 3.8 million votes. That's only about 400,000 fewer than Reform have won this time. Another point, Reform hoped to get about 6 million votes. They didn't. They got about 4.2 million votes.
Still huge.
Still a lot of votes.
It's big, but it's not nearly as big as they were hoping. But the really...
So, hold on, are you trying to come to the point that actually we haven't lost faith in the two main parties?
I think this is a fascinating election because actually, if you look at Labour's vote share, which I've already pointed out, is lower than when Corbyn was leader in that disastrous election in 2019 and significantly lower than 2017. It is only about 5.4, 5.5, 5.5 million more votes than Nigel Farage's Reform. And that suggests potentially trouble ahead in our politics. Labour cannot afford to be complacent.
And Storm, it's interesting, you mentioned Charles Kennedy, who I worked for in 1999. So we're going back 25 years. And even then, 25 years ago, he went on and on ad nauseum about how the tectonic plates of politics were shifting and about how people's vote, people had become much more promiscuous, was always the word he used, with their own vote. In other words, they didn't just vote how their dad or their mum had voted. They were thinking, away from the traditional politics of Tory versus Labour. And 25 years later, that has absolutely come true, what he predicted would happen. OK, let's now speak to columnist Owen Jones. Owen, you decided not to vote for the two main parties. Have you turned your back on them?
Well, it seems that way, doesn't it? Tiny violin. I voted for the Labour Party all my life. I'm a geriatric millennial. I'm nearly 40. But yeah, I voted for the Green Party for the first time. And actually, it's really interesting. In my constituency, I think they came 4th or 5th last time. And they surged. They've gone up from about 4% to over 17% where I live. But I think what's striking is, for me, this is the best possible result. Given our electoral system. What I've been telling people for months now is a Tory defeat is inevitable, which it is, and that's because of the destruction the Tories have inflicted on the country. No defeat has been more deserved in British democratic history. So people are safe. People can vote for the Green Party or independents. And I should note as well as the Green Party, several independents who stand against what I would regard as Israel's genocide in Gaza also took up seats. And if you combine all those seats, that's as impressive a showing as reform, the Greens plus those independents. Now, what I think you're seeing at the moment is our electoral system is completely out of date. It is absurd, let's be honest, that Labour has got the same share of the vote in 2019 when everyone said that's a catastrophe, how hideous, look how unpopular and, fringe these people are. And yet it's got double the number of seats for the same share of the vote. And I strongly disagree with reform. I think, I'd agree with what Mike Parry said. I think what a lot of their candidates show the racist poison that runs throughout reform. Democratically, if you get millions of people voting for a party and they're not properly represented in Parliament, that is an attack on democracy itself. And I think the problem we've now got is you can see the success of the Greens and independents. People who used to vote Labour have gone to them. You can see with the Conservatives dividing between them and reform, and it's reform which has ensured the Labour landslide today. That shows our electoral system is trying to keep together two parties which don't represent those opinions anymore. The Labour Party. Yeah,
I hear you would want to change the voting system, and when you look at the results, you can see there is maybe an argument for that. I suppose what we're trying to get to in this part, and we'd love your views on it at home as well, is why there has been such a large swing to these smaller parties. What have the two main parties, and Labour included in this, as you said, the number of votes that they've got is not as large as you would expect for the number of seats. Why they have lost all of these votes? What did they do? Have they lost the favour of the general population?
Really straightforward with Labour. The Labour leadership decided that you could just drive out anyone who disagreed with them. That if you believed in taxing the rich, public investment, public ownership, scrapping tuition fees, then you no longer had a place in politics. They purged people who believe in those politics. For example, Faiza Shaheen. And the reason they didn't win against Ian Duncan Smith is they purged a brilliant candidate they had there. The vote was then split and he won as a consequence. So because of that, they thought to themselves, well, we can get away with that. We're not going to suffer any consequences. Who cares? Stupid lefties, out on your ear. That's the end of the story. Well, it doesn't work like that. If people don't feel they're represented in politics, they will actually go elsewhere. And I think what should scare the Labour Party is this is as good as it's going to get for them now. People were desperate to get rid of the Conservatives. According to YouGov, the main reason for half of Labour's voters, the reason they voted for Labour, was to get rid of the Conservatives, with only 5% saying the policies and 1% saying Keir Starmer's leadership. That's what YouGov said. A lot of people I know are very angry with Keir Starmer, but they voted Labour because they were scared of letting the Tories in. That's not going to hold now, because what will happen is Keir Starmer will be Prime Minister. He will do lots of things which I think are unpopular. I think you'll see real cuts to our public services. And more voters are going to go, look, I held my nose last time. A lot of people voted Green or Independent. I didn't. I stuck with Labour, but because I wanted to keep the Tories out. Now there's not the kind of the bogeyman of the Tories being in charge to kind of emotionally blackmail people into voting for Labour. A lot of these people now are going to see what Labour do in power and they're going to go elsewhere. Owen. If the Greens are already getting this level of support now, look at what happened with UKIP. When the Tories came to power in 2010, they got more and more popular.
Matt, one quick question
just
from
quickly. You and I have clashed in the past. We're from different wings of the Labour Party. Can we at least agree that it is reassuring that if you tot up the Green vote, the Lib Dem vote and the Labour vote, it beat the Tories and Reform combined convincingly?
Yeah, I think that's a great result. Look, I think most people in this country actually do think we should ask the rich to pay more, invest in our services, think our utilities should be run by the people. The problem is Labour don't represent that anymore. But of course, I'm glad that people rejected, most people didn't vote for the Conservatives or Reform. But Matt, I suppose what I just respond to is, look, at the end of the day, the way of avoiding all of this, lifelong Labour voters like myself, and I know a lot of people who made an emotional decision not to vote for the Labour Party, they've managed to get they got a huge majority. No party in history has won a majority on such a low share of the vote. They got away with that this time because of Reform and the way our electoral system works. But if the Labour leadership wants to keep on insulting and treating people who have the temerity to believe we should tax rich people more and invest in our services and nationalise our utilities, treat them with disrespect, they're going to lose very easily the next election because they're already only getting 32.5%. What are they going to get next time when they're in power for a few years? Parties don't add on votes when they're in power.
We're going to have to leave it on that fairly bleak outlook for the incoming government. Owen Jones, columnist there, thank you very much for your time. It kind of harks back to an earlier comment you made, Mike, about the fact that how long is it actually going to be before the general population turn on this government? Hard to say that, or the incoming government, hard to say that when they're not even in number 10 yet. Simon from Manchester, what's your view when it comes to the reasons why the general population have turned away from our two main parties?
We've simply lost faith. Both Labour, I mean, I was a Conservative voter for 42 years. I've gone to Reform now. They just simply don't do what they say they're going to do. Both of them, really, in a way, but Conservatives specifically.
Simon, that is quite a big swing from Labour to Reform. I mean, historically, that would be tremendously different policies. What attracted you to Reform?
Sorry, I was a lifelong Conservative voter. Sorry,
Conservative, Reform. I've heard that wrong then. Apologies. Not such a big swing, in fact. So what attracted you to Reform that Conservatives weren't offering you?
I mean, two things, really. Yes, the migration, immigration, illegal and legal, the legal being the biggest issue. 750,000 people every year is unsustainable. But also the Renters Reform Bill, I'm a landlord, they were going to scrap that, which I think is a good idea. The Renters Reform Bill will cause mass homelessness. And I just could not agree with the Conservatives' view on that, given they are meant to sort of champion entrepreneurialism and what is a small landlord but an entrepreneur, and they seem dead against us, and I think Labour will finish us off.
Simon, thank you very much for your call.
Can I, Simon, one question, please?
Very quickly,
Simon,
we need to run
Conservative to Reform. Did you not realise that if you did that, you're weakening the Conservative Party and giving the country a Labour government which is going to make life even harder with more taxes, more red tape, more power to the unions?
The Conservatives, honestly, Mike, they were dead in the water anyway. What we need to do is purge ourselves of the fake Conservatives we currently have, and then hopefully in 5 years' time we'll have a proper Conservative party. Yeah,
I hope so. Yeah, well done.
OK, David from Cumbria, you're up next. Why are people turning away from the two major parties to the smaller ones?
Hi, Storm.
Hi.
Right, no, I've actually, because I've been a Conservative voter since 1983, and I voted for the Heritage Party this time, not because I wanted the Heritage Party or anything, but I wanted none of the above.
So you didn't think to spoil your ballot paper, you just went for a smaller party you kind of knew would probably not get in?
Yeah, because I think to spoil a ballot paper is childish, and not to vote after all the people who have died so that we can vote is also wrong. So I went to the polling station and found somebody that I could put a cross against. They actually got 81. They actually got 81 votes, which about sums it up, really.
Well, I mean, 81 votes, and perhaps some of them were similar to you, David, protest votes, and perhaps a lot of the smaller parties did get protest votes. Thank you very much for your call. Lee from Monmouthshire, did you vote for a smaller party, or did you go for one of the two main parties?
I voted for Liberal Democrats only because I couldn't vote for Reform. And the reason I wanted to vote for them is because I have no faith at all in Labour or Conservative. Labour are just another Conservative in red. You won't see any difference in their policies or whatever. The country will just be exactly the same. And the only reason Labour won is because Conservative done so bad.
Well, I mean, there is an argument to be said, is this a win for Labour or is it a loss for the Conservatives, which is the more dominant force? But Daisy, interesting point, maybe lots of people going for the smaller parties, actually because you can't really fit a cigarette paper between the two.
Absolutely true. You know, lots of economists have said there's been this conspiracy of silence around the economy because when you look at the two manifestos, you would think that the economy was booming in the way that Mike thinks it is, which is cloud cuckoo land. It is not booming. We have serious problems. And you're right, there isn't any difference between the promises. All we know is that there will be tax rises because they're already bedded in.
Fractional growth, tiny growth. Don't forget, just a few months ago, we were in recession, and the big challenge for Starmer and Labour, he has pinned all his hopes, effectively, on growth. Yeah. How is he going to get that growth? That is a key question.
And we're doing better than Europe.
Well, we have a little update for you. Sir Keir Starmer has